Hi, my name is Gabe Newell. I'm the president and co-founder of Valve. So while we were working on the original Left 4 Dead, everybody on the team enjoyed this style of play a lot, this co-op action horror movie experience. And as we were building it, people had a bunch of ideas for how they wanted to move that forward, how to really amplify that experience. And that's sort of one of the frustrating things when you're working on a game, especially when you're working in sort of a new design direction, is you have to sort of cut off at some point and say, well, we'll do that in the next game. But as soon as we finished Left 4 Dead, everybody who'd worked on it said, we want to go and do Left 4 Dead 2 now. There are all these things we felt that, were ideas that we got while we were playing, especially when they were playtesting Left 4 Dead, that they wanted to put into a sequel. So it's interesting, the difference in the reactions between announcing Left 4 Dead and announcing Left 4 Dead 2. When we announced the original Left 4 Dead, the big issue is getting people excited about a new game from Valve. We still have people who are saying, what's happened with Adrian Shepard? I want to know what's going on there. Or what about Day of Defeat? We'd like something there. So when you announce something new, what you have to do is convince people that it's an interesting game, that there's something unique that's going to be worth their time and energy. And that's what a lot of the focus was on Left 4 Dead.
Like this before. Jesus, don't let that stop you from smearing it all over yourself.
With Left 4 Dead 2, there was already so much awareness and excitement based on the fact that we just shipped the first game that we were excited because we got to talk about, hey, we're going to do a sequel and we're going to do it in a year, which is really different and new for us. There was some segment of the community that was like, hey, you're doing a sequel in a year, so what's going on there? Why are you changing your pattern? What does this tell us? Are you suddenly turning this into a sports game, and they're going to churn out another crap sequel every 12 months. And so that was something that was different for us in terms of how we would talk to the community and educate them as to why this was a good thing, not a bad thing, and what it would mean for them in terms of the game that they would get to play on November 17th. One of the concerns that were raised by people who had Left 4 Dead is, what's different enough about this to justify it being a new sequel? So we've spent a lot of time talking about what the scope is, both artistically in terms of the scale of the game, how the gameplay is evolving, what are some of the technological pieces that have moved forward, and doing anything we could to make sure that our fans, who are the reason that we exist, the reason that we have a business, understood why Left 4 Dead 2 was a really positive evolution rather than just us trying to come up with a way of stripping money out of a successful and popular game. So we tried everything. We tried to find people who were sort of articulate spokespeople for that skepticism about this and bring them in here and show them what we were doing and say, look, this is exactly what we're doing. These are the people who are building it. Ask them anything you want. Play the game. And that was proved to be a pretty effective way of communicating with sort of these really hardcore members of the community and reassure them that this was a good thing rather than something that they should be skeptical and worried about. By really focusing on communicating with that group, we can also measure how well the Left 4 Dead 2 is doing in pre-orders. And so Left 4 Dead 2 is actually, for people who've joined the boycott group on Steam, we can look at their pre-orders and they're actually pre-ordering the product at a higher rate than Left 4 Dead 1 owners who weren't in the boycott. And what that tells us is that we did a really good job of understanding what these issues were and communicating with this group of what, at the end of the day, are some of our most hardcore and supportive fans over the history of the company. So Left 4 Dead 2 is an interesting product from just a project management perspective. Tom Leonard is a really senior game developer. He's been in worked on a lot of very interesting projects. And he had a theory about project management that he wanted to try out. One of the things everybody's aware of is there's a lot of crunch time in video game development. That can be really harmful to people over time. Some people get burned out and they don't really come back for like 5 years. They're just so fried by the experience of shipping a title. People just rolled off a pretty difficult shipping product. Left 4 Dead 1 was pretty challenging for us in terms of how much work we had to do, how much integration we had to do with various groups, and making sure that it would run on all of the different hardware platforms and on the Xbox. And so with Left 4 Dead 2, he wanted to attack this problem. And there are aspects of that from a design perspective and how you design the schedule and how you manage workloads. And it also meant that they tried very hard to front load their work as much as they could. So they actually tried to be in sort of mini crunch mode from right at the beginning. And what that meant is we're sort of in this kind of strange situation now at the end of the project where the product's already very far along in terms of going into stores, and we still have weeks before the actual ship date. So in the past, I've been on projects where we're like racing to the airplane to throw the disc into the door to get it to replication in time to get it into stores. And in this case, because of the approach to front-loading the hectic part of the schedule at the beginning and removing all of the uncertainty about the project at the front rather than at the end, we're actually spending a lot more time sort of sitting around playtesting without a lot of frantic development going on. I think that when you're designing and building a game like Left 4 Dead, you reach a point where you have to stop, right? And during the course of that, where you're finishing the concept of the original project, you get a whole bunch of ideas for what you want to do in the sequel. This is just a natural part of building games. And I think most everything that's in Left 4 Dead 2 grew out of that sense of Left 4 Dead 1. I think with Left 4 Dead 2 finished now, we have a bunch of ideas. They're a little bit broader ideas. Tom Leonard and Steve Bond are two of the guys who worked on the project. And they're really interested in this problem of scalable artificial intelligence. So the inspiration we got out of Left 4 Dead 1 led to Left 4 Dead 2. The inspirations that we seem to be walking away from Left 4 Dead 2 are really about trying to think about the impact that Larrabee and similar approaches are going to have on the design of artificial intelligence systems going forward. And not just the code piece of it, but the production piece. It's like, how do you make the level designers 10 times as productive? That's the big challenge that we face right now. How do you create the density of game experience that we think is possible with these new CPU architectures that are going to be coming down the pike? And that seems to be what we're taking away from Left 4 Dead 2. It's not like the Left 4 Dead 2 team wants to turn around and spend another year and build Left 4 Dead 3. Their reaction out of this game is to say, I need to go spend 2 to 3 years trying to tackle this really big, gnarly technology problem. So it's sort of interesting to see what we come out of a project and where it propels us into the next stage. We still have a bunch of content that we're going to be creating for the original Left 4 Dead. It's a very popular product with customers and we want to continue to support them, and we also need to do the same thing for Left 4 Dead 2. I think there are also lots of opportunities between interoperability between our various games. So we're trying to look at sort of crossover DLC ideas because we think that there's a lot of overlap in the groups of people who play these, and so giving people incentives to move between the different games is something that we're looking at a lot. There'll be the standard sorts of things, more weapons, more campaigns, more special infected. But we're also, I think, from a design perspective, looking at all of our games and trying to think of, are there ways to add value to these collections of games? So if somebody has Team Fortress 2 and they have Left 4 Dead 2, what's exciting and interesting to those kinds of customers? Our view in general on these sort of post-shipment releases is we want them to be free, right? It's a great way for us to get the community excited. It helps the mod community to have an active and energized user base of our existing game. It gets people excited to buy gifts for their friends and things like that. So that's really our strong preference. The challenge on the consoles is that they don't have that sort of model. For us, we think that it's a real problem on the consoles not to support that because we think it's a really proven and successful business model, and trying to impose a single model for things like MMOs, music games, multiplayer action games like ours and so on, in terms of DLC pricing, I think is very restrictive. It's like an operating system saying you can build any application you want so long as it's a spreadsheet. So as far as supporting other consoles, we're always evaluating those options. The mobile platforms, I've got an iPhone and I'm really intrigued by this notion of what mobile experiences are and how they tie into the overall gaming experience. There's the Mac. We really get a lot of requests from Mac users that they'd like to see games. PlayStation 3, the Wii. So what we tend to do is we look at how much we can create that's valuable to customers for the amount of effort. So if we have this much bandwidth to work on stuff, we say, are we better off broadening the platform, or are we better off investing more in the platforms that we have? And so we do that evaluation constantly and try to look at what the trade-offs are and advantages. Going to any of the other consoles beyond the Xbox is a really big time commitment, and it's a small ongoing tax. So you have this big lump of work you have to do up front, and then each time you release, you have the tax that's associated with it. And there are surprising taxes you don't expect. For example, managing the differences in models between DLC on the PC versus those individual consoles that you don't anticipate. I remember sort of back in the late 90s, it was really questionable that multiplayer games, that you could actually sell a multiplayer game successfully rather than a multiplayer game being sort of this afterthought on a single player game. And it seems like the same thing's happening nowadays in terms of co-op. It's like, oh, well, you have to have a fun multiplayer game, but co-op needs to be this sort of add-on because there isn't a large enough market or there aren't interesting enough design opportunities to really create compelling experiences. So I think Left 4 Dead is a good example of how the customers were ahead of us once again. I hope that it's inspiring other game companies to go after these kinds of co-op game experiences.